Hi, I'm Michelle.
Hi, I'm Tara.
Welcome to our podcast, Books and Beyond.
On this episode, we spoke with journalist Jane Borges, who's written a book called Bombay Balchao. The book is about a small Catholic neighborhood in South Bombay. It's called Cavell. And I can't believe I had never heard of it because I grew up 5 minutes away from this neighborhood.
I connected with Jane on so many different levels, just like her, I was also born and brought up in the Gulf, and then I moved to Bombay. So, I love how her book is about Catholics and about this Goan and Mangalorean community because I could relate so much.
I understand that. Another thing that we learnt about Jane is how she actually wrote a book with veteran journalist S. Hussain Zaidi when she was in her early 20s, and that book is called Mafia Queens of Mumbai. And one of the stories from the book, the story of Gangubai, who is his brothel queen, is now being adapted by Sanjay Leela Bhansali.
And Alia Bhatt is playing the role.
Crazy.
I love Alia Bhatt's acting. Can't wait.
So on this episode, we found out, how she did her research for both these books, what her writing process is like. She's a journalist, so how does she, manage writing books and also reporting at the same time? And we just loved all her answers, and we're sure you will too.
Welcome to our podcast, Books and Beyond. And we are speaking to Jane Borges. She is the author of Bombay Balchao, a fantastic novel about a Catholic community in Bombay. She has also co-authored Mafia Queens of Mumbai with S. Hussain Zaidi, and she's a journalist for Midday. Welcome, Jane.
Welcome.
Hi, Michelle. Hi, Tara. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. So Jane, let's begin with your book, Bombay Balchao. So how did the idea of the book come to you? And we know that it chronicles and tells us about a small Catholic neighborhood in South Bombay that's called Cavell. So how did the idea of, telling stories about this neighborhood come to you?
So, I'm a resident of Cavell, and it's a lovely and actually very, very tiny neighborhood in South Bombay, sandwiched somewhere between two markets, Shira Bazaar and Kalba Devi. I moved to this neighborhood somewhere in 2003. And for the longest time, I didn't think too much about it because, it was just one tiny compound where I lived and a church with very, very few parishioners. I didn't see anything great or fascinating about this neighborhood until I started researching for Mafia Queen several years later. And while I was at the Asiatic Library, I remember coming across a small para on Cavell by the late historian Gerson Jose de Cunha. He's also a very well-known medical practitioner in the 19th century. It was a book about Bombay. He had written a history, basically, writing about the history of, or the origin of the city. And he mentioned very sparingly about Cavell, but speaks about how this used to once be the village of the Colis. And that is how the name Cavell is likely to have come, Colvars and then Cavell. Several years later, through my research, learned that Cavell didn't really get its name from Colis because the Colis lived closer to the sea and Cavell is further away.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes. But that is something that, my research threw at me. But it fascinated me that something as insignificant as this neighborhood would find mention in a historian's document on the city. He also went on to talk about how it was the largest Roman Catholic hamlet in the 18th century in Bombay. Now, that was massive because we were a parish of, 200, 250 people. I was wondering how, a street as busy as this, because it is in between two market areas, could have such a fascinating history. Over a period of time, while interacting with neighbors, I'd learned that in my building alone, we had 3 mayors. So on the ground floor, we had one Dr. Joseph Colasso. On the first floor, Dr. Joseph Albin D'Souza, and then later his son Joseph Leon D'Souza, who all were mayors in, say, somewhere in the mid-20th century. Now that was significant because we were living in a building that had a living history to it, and none of us were aware. I think the advantage for me was that I was an outsider and moved in quite late here. So I could see it from a perspective of being interested in the community.
So tell us why you felt you were an outsider in this community.
Well, because I came here in 2003 and when I came here, I realized that a lot of families here had lived here for centuries. So they might have been like third or fourth generation residents of Covell. And I was really new to this place.
So where did you come from?
So my parents are from Mumbai, but I moved to Muscat in Oman when I was a year old. And I came back only when I was 16. So till then, Mumbai was just a place where you came for summer vacations. And we didn't really have a house in Covell until my parents bought it, say, in the late 90s. And again, it was such a rundown home, because it was my mother found it to be very fascinating. And I thought I should really thank my mom and dad for having thought of investing in such property. But as kids, you didn't see anything fascinating in an old home. So, we never really went to Covell and spent our summer holidays there. We'd usually be with our aunts or with our cousins. So I never really connected with the place in any way. And when I went to Covell and lived there, even the residents were unable to connect with me because they had lived with their neighbors for so many years and they already had developed connections. Everyone in some way was related to the other because they had intermarried. So someone was somebody's cousin, someone was somebody's nephew. So it just felt like, you came, it took some time for them to accept somebody who was not like them or who did not belong, to their community. And it also took a lot of time for us to feel belonged. And
so I can totally relate because like I was, born and brought up in Bahrain. And whenever I used to come down here for vacations, like I couldn't relate with anybody, so I can understand where you're coming from.
Right.
And it's interesting. I mean, I grew up in South Bombay my entire life, and I had no idea that this community ever existed.
You would even not know, even now, if you had to come to Dr. Vegas Street. And the fascinating way in which I relay the stories, it might just not seem like the same place that you talk about. But that is what I was trying to tell through the story, which is why I go back 70 years in time to tell you what this place must have been like, because I did speak to a lot of older residents there to get a semblance of how Covell was like, say, in the early 1900s, before it evolved into what it has become now. So now it is just, you have like pockets, very dispersed population in one lane. So it's just one long street, which is called Dr. Vegas Street. And that is named after Dr. Gabriel Vegas. I don't know if you know of Dr. Gabriel Vegas.
No, we don't.
So Dr. Gabriel Vegas was the first Indian Christian president of Bombay Municipal Corporation. And he is said to have lived in Covell at some point in time or grew up in Covell. He was the man who was responsible for saving the city from the plague of 1896-97. He personally inoculated over 18,000 residents with the Hafkins serum. And his statue is still there at Metro. If you see, there's a Dr. Vegas statue.
Oh, I'll look out for it.
Yeah, and our street is named after Dr. Vegas. His father's tombstone is still in our church, in Our Lady of Health, Covell, the church where we go to. So there is a very strong connection of the people who were very important or significant to the city's history with Covell. Same with Dr. Jason D'Cunha, because I would later learn that he also lived in Covell at some point in time, which is why it interested him enough to write about it in a book on the origins of Bombay.
So we are really glad that you did write the book, but we also read somewhere that it was an abandoned project and, like Sanghamitra Biswas actually convinced you to write it. So
editor.
Yeah. So we want to know, like, what exactly did she tell you that convinced you? Any anecdote?
And why did you abandon it? Because I love the fact that you have captured such a rich history. I mean, this is an undiscovered part of Bombay and there's so much that has been written about Bombay.
So I'll tell you how this novel actually began. I briefly moved to Muscat in 2000 and the end of 2013. This was 2 years after I had done Mafia Queens of Mumbai, and I was really exhausted and burnt out, and I wanted a break. And I thought, why not go back to a city that I'm familiar with, but just work for the time being, because I was getting a good job there with the newspaper, and my father was still there. So I moved briefly for 2 years to Muscat between 2014 to 2015. And this is a time when, for the first time, I started missing Bombay. Because, as a child who's born and brought up in the Gulf, you are used to a certain kind of lifestyle. And I think, Michelle, you would relate to it because
it's different.
It's very different. It's, you're living in luxury, and luxury is normal. We normalize that kind of luxury in the Gulf. Here you come and you're suddenly starved for everything, you know.
Luxury is not the norm.
Yeah, luxury is not the norm. And it's not a way of life, at least. You know, it is restricted to, say, the elite in the city.
Yeah.
And so I did feel out of place in Bombay for the longest time. This was until I went back to work in the Gulf and I started missing home terribly. And I realized how much Bombay has now seeped into my veins, and it's inseparable, and I cannot live anywhere else in the city, in any other city in the world for that matter. And because you become nostalgic about home, and I was homesick, I started writing very, very disconnected stories. And I think my first few stories were about Bombay. And suddenly one day I started writing a short story and I used to put it on my blog. And one day I wrote a short story that was closer to home, like Cavell. And it just felt like something that fit into my story about Cavell. And that is how the first story began, really, which was the story, the chapter 1. That was the first draft. It's still on my blog. It's called Paper Hearts, but it's very different.
I love
from
the name.
Yes. It's very different from the story that you see in the book, but that was the genesis of this book. And everyone loved that story. It was a very unusual story.
So
and
why did you think of putting it up on your blog?
Because I really didn't think it was something that would make it into a book. And that story, if you go back to it now, it doesn't really, it's a very disconnected short story, but that is what inspired me to write. And I wrote, and I actually wrote 5 good chapters at the fag end of my stint in Muscat. And I thought I had a brilliant novel. Now, everyone thinks they have a brilliant book in mind because they were all very disconnected short stories. But I had learned, I always knew I wanted to do something with short stories because I didn't have the patience for a novel, which is why you see my book is a lot like, you know, they're a set of a compilation of short stories.
Exactly. We were just discussing that.
Yeah,
like, it makes it more consumable.
Yes. And because I don't have a patience for, though I love reading books, but I don't think I'm patient enough to write a book like that.
Takes a lot of stamina to, you know, see a whole novel through.
Yes. And then I came back to Bombay in December 2015 and I made my neighbor read, you know, whatever I had written. And his name is Ervil Menezes. He passed away 2 years ago, but he was the former news editor at Indian Express. And because he was the one who'd given me a lot of stories about Cavell, I thought he's the right person to kind of, you know, show this book to. And when he read it, he was like, rubbish, this is not Cavell. and it broke my heart because he was so brutal. But I'm glad he was brutally honest because that really made me introspect and think about my stories again. And then Midday happened and I shelved the project. I'm like, you know, you don't get once you are completely, and I work for Sunday Midday, which is really hectic.
So yeah, I mean, I read your articles every Sunday and you write on a variety of topics. I imagine that's very time consuming.
It's time consuming and we do large stories because it's a weekend feature, so long form. And I cover books, heritage and urban planning. So you're writing 3 or 2 big stories in a week, which takes all the time in the world. So I really didn't have the time at that point. And I was just like learning the ropes of my beats because these were new beats to me at that point. So I shelved the project for 2 good years. But incidentally, I was covering books. So, I would be part of, sometimes they'd ask me to come for these panels and, host a book launch or something
fun.
of that sort.
Such a cool job.
And that is how it happened, where I was part of a panel for a book launch. And the literary agent of the author, Anish Chandy, who is the founder of Labyrinth Literary Agency, he reached out to me randomly saying, hey, I, heard you were at this book launch and I know that I've read Mafia Queens of Mumbai and I'd like to do another book with you. Anish is based out of Delhi and he flew to Mumbai and then we had a meeting and he's like, I want you to do something related to Mafia. And, I wasn't very interested in the Mafia. I think I did that because it was an interesting project when it came to me and I was working with the Asian Age at that time and Hussain Zaidi said, why don't you join? And, because you like storytelling, it would be interesting to get you on board.
But what a great project. I mean, I read that you got that project when you were 24. Is that right?
I was 21 actually. I completed the book when I was 24, which is why I didn't say no. But, I realized after that what troubles I had the kind of perils that I had put myself into as a 21, 22-year-old. You really don't think about where you're getting into and what you're getting into. But
I want to know more about that.
But I was dealing with a lot of people from the underworld, researching, interviewing them. And you don't really think of it until the book comes out and you're like, oh, now I could get into trouble. But it didn't happen, fortunately. It didn't.
And we also heard that it's being adapted, and we saw Alia Bhatt's look for Gangubai, and it's just amazing.
Yeah.
How does it feel?
It feels nice, definitely, because that story was close to my heart. I actually went to Kamatipura, spent a lot of time there before we did find a character like Gangubai for our book. So it was interesting, and I'm so glad, someone like Sanjay Leela Bhansali is adapting that story into a movie.
And two very different books.
Yes, and exactly. So Anish was not convinced when I told him that, I wanted to do a novel which was based on community. And he said, who might be interested in Kavel? Because it's a neighborhood in Bombay. It's already not a very popular neighborhood. Nobody knows about it. And I don't see where this could go. But I told him very clearly, if this is not happening, Anish, I don't want to do a crime book. And I said, I had this book. I had worked on it 2 years ago, but I've shelved it. If you want to have a look at it and see if it is interesting. I don't think I'm convinced about it. But if you are, we'll take it forward. And he got back to me within a week. And he said, we're doing this. If it interests me, I'm sure it would interest someone else.
That's amazing.
And then when Westland came on board, it was Sanghamitra who convinced me to write it in a way that would make it universal, in the sense we started weaving in the real history of Kavel. Because initially I hadn't named the place as Kavel. It was named... it was called something else altogether.
Oh, that's interesting.
She says if you're talking about real histories, you might as well name it after that and bring in the history so that people are drawn to the idea and the head. You're having two simultaneous conversations.
And then, they can go visit the place.
Yes.
And you even have done walking tours of the place.
And that is what has happened, because everyone is so fascinated. And I'm so glad, because that was the idea of doing the book. After a point, I realized that I wanted to draw people's attention to Kavel, because Kavel has been documented. People have written about Kavel. Goan historian Teresa Albuquerque has written an entire book where she talks about neighborhoods like Kavel, Sonapur and Dabul, which are significant South Bombay neighborhoods. But the residents of Kavel have no idea of this place. And I was wondering that if it has been documented, how best can you make it a universal space for people to be completely entrenched in it? And I think nothing like storytelling can do that better.
So it's interesting, Jane, how, you put in the effort to try to make it universal. Because, one thing from the book that I absolutely loved was the humor, the Goan mangy jokes. But then I also wondered, aren't they inside jokes? So were you worried that, any other reader who's outside of the community, would they really get the jokes?
Which is the worry that even Anish had, because Anish is a Bombay boy and he settled in Delhi now. And he knew, because he's from the Catholic community, he knew that these jokes were very common, between the Goans, Mangaloreans and East Indian community. But would anyone else be interested? And I said, yes, they would be interested if you give them context. You can't just throw these jokes at them. You need to understand why, everyone, when people talk about the Catholics of Bombay, they, club them together. But the Catholics are a very diverse, just like you have Catholics and Protestants, the Catholics are also very diverse. And some of them cannot see eye to eye.
Yeah, so I didn't even know that, there are different factions even within the community. And sometimes they have different perceptions of each other and they may not even get along. And for those of you who don't know, Mangi is Mangalorean, which I didn't know until I, became friends with Michelle. And even though you did give us context about the jokes and all of that, as a non-member of the community, I did connect with them, but not in the same way that I think Michelle has connected with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think different people connect differently with the story. I remember giving my a draft to a friend from Kerala to read, and he said that, he didn't feel there was a need to get into the history and the backstory of the Goans and Mangaloreans. Why do we need to? You can just get into the story. But, fascinatingly, even the Goans and Mangaloreans don't know why they cannot see eye to eye.
Do you know why, Michelle?
No. I feel it's so petty.
And the thing is, I first realized that, there was a problem between the two. And my mom would tell me, my mom is Mangalorean and her mother-in-law is Goan. And she told me once that, I don't think my mother-in-law was too happy with the match. Because, she was not very happy that her son found a Mangalorean daughter-in-law.
I've heard that so many times.
She'd have been happy if there was a Goan there. And I thought, why? Because, they almost speak the same language. They make similar kinds of food, though Mangaloreans have a lot of coconut in their
Yeah,
curries,
we
but
do.
that should not be the reason for one to not marry the other. And there could be a backstory to this, which is why I went back to find context and I reached out to historians. I spoke to them, and it turns out that Mangaloreans used to be originally from Goa. And
Oh, I didn't know that.
I did mention that in the book. Yeah, and the Inquisition happened somewhere in the 1500s, where the Portuguese take over and they force convert all the locals to
Oh, yes.
Catholicism.
So apparently we fled
Yeah.
to Mangalore.
And I think, some locals didn't mind getting converted, but because the Hinduism was so entrenched, they were offended when they were asked to dress like, the Portuguese, that is, wear dresses instead of your saris, or they were definitely offended when the temples were brought down, or, idols were
Of
desecrated.
course.
So they decided that they don't want to be part of this, little culture, and they move out. Much to, I think the Goans who stayed back thought
like
it
a
wasn't
traitor.
They
They were
felt like they were
traitors.
traitors who were abandoning them. Because at this point, Goa was also afflicted with the plague, and a lot of other diseases were very rampant. And how could you abandon your own brothers when something is not going right in your own land? The Mangaloreans, on the other hand, found the Goans to be spineless because they refused to act against a bunch of dictators who were trying to dictate how they live in their own land. And that stereotype still stays. The Mangaloreans will call the Goans Susegads, and,
You put that in the book.
lazy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it just
And what is
goes
the name
on.
that the Goans call the Mangaloreans?
The Goans just call them shrewd
Yeah,
and
we
cunning.
just
Oh,
find us
shrewd
shrewd.
and cunning.
Yeah, they find
I was
this-
thinking of you, Michelle, when I read that. I was like, Michelle is not shrewd or cunning.
and no, business minded, very, so theirs
Very
is all very
calculative.
calculative. And these are stereotypes that have stayed. And I'm thinking, how can such stereotypes stay over centuries? And I know kids, like in their 20s who still talk like that. So it's problematic that, I know a senior journalist who is in his late 20s who had a post put up on Facebook last year where he said the Mangaloreans abandoned us. And I said, they abandoned you 400 years ago. You can't sit with that all these years of your life.
That's ridiculous.
And that is the problem. You need to understand where these stories and histories come from, and which is why I thought, and we really don't know if that is the connection because nobody has made those connections. But when I did speak to historians, they said we could only guess that this could be the reason why there is this hatred, permanent hatred between the Goans and Mangaloreans.
It's a speculation.
That's speculation, but we can only assume that this could be one of the reasons why these kind of stereotypes have grown. The same with the natives, the East Indians and the Goans. The Goans come to Bombay at a time when the natives are flourishing, the native Christians, who are also converted by the Portuguese. And suddenly they feel that their land has been taken over or overrun by Goans who are here to take up all the plum opportunities. And the Goans are very enterprising when they come in. They have all the top jobs as well as the bottom jobs, the ayahs, the bakers, the tailors, the architects, the engineers, the teachers. Everyone is a Goan. And where does this leave the locals, the native Christians? They show their allegiance to the British by naming themselves East Indians, which is the East India, named after the East India Company.
Yeah.
It has
I
nothing
never
to do.
knew the context behind East
It has
Indian
nothing
thing.
to do with East India because they don't come from East India. They come
I
from the
thought it
western
was
part
that,
of
yeah.
India. That is how they name themselves East Indians. That is to show that so that they could demand the right kind of opportunities for themselves as locals and natives of the land.
So I love how you, have woven so much history into the book as well. And it just brings the whole community alive for me. And so I wanted to know, you worked as a journalist, you worked and also on a nonfiction book project. So does being a journalist help you in writing fiction in any way?
Definitely, because the kind of fiction that I set out to tell was not something that I just imagined from my head. It was a story that had to make sense with something that was real. And for that, you require some rigor and research. And being a journalist allowed that to happen very organically. I was thinking like a journalist first and then second as a storyteller because I was putting every kind of narrative that I had into perspective, giving context that comes when you are a journalist. If you are telling a story of a community in a certain time and place, you link it with certain bits of history, and you'll see that come in every time, because I'm trying to talk about 70 years and the different histories of or historical events in the city that have shaped the lives of people in Cavell. So suppose something like the Bombay Dock explosion, for that matter, or you have the emergency, or for that matter, something as the real estate boom in Mumbai. All of that has required some kind of research as to how it shaped something in the context of the real Cavell. And so that really did help, because I think otherwise it would, and as a journalist, you know exactly what to look for. I have known, you know, when you are a writer, and especially a novelist or a storyteller, you tend to look at, you know, pore over reams and reams of documents, not knowing what you want to look for. But as a journalist, because you're always short of time, you know, you're always looking for a certain kind of fact that would fit into your story. And because I'm writing 3 stories a week, I have to do exactly only this much kind of research to fit that into my story. So it became very easy to do my research, because I knew where to go and look for it, how to look for it, whom to reach out to, because I was connecting. I was anyway covering books. I was anyway covering heritage and urban planning. So I knew which kind of historians to speak with for what, and, you know, so it was just very specific. So I wouldn't say I invested hours and hours of research, because just because I was part of the system, it helped me, you know, connect the dots quicker.
Yeah, and you seem so well versed with this whole, research process. So one of our favorite characters from the book, Jane, is Mario, because he's the king of crosswords. So how did you really pick out, these interesting characters from Cavell? Are they really based on people from Cavell, or are they imaginary?
They are inspired. So not just from Cavell, but from different parts of neighborhoods around Cavell. Like I said, Dabul, Sonapur, or Kotachiwadi for that matter. All of these characters existed in some shape or form. You know, like my close friend Ervil Menezes was a journalist, and so is Michael. And there is a incident that I write about how Michael grows a beard, because he had written about a bunch of goons, and they were after him, and they'd come chasing down, looking for him in Cavell. Michael does something very similar. So, you know, I kind of, get these little, the way they talk, the patua, or, the typical Goan accent, or the way their English is different from, say, another resident of Bombay. It came because I lived in a setting like that, and I interacted with residents. Mario's character, the fascination or obsession with crosswords again comes from a subject I interviewed for the Midday, this person called Joe Albuquerque, who has been obsessed with crosswords for more than 50 to 60 years. In fact, Dabul had a crossword club where they'd meet every evening. In those days, you'd wrap up work by 4:35. They'd come home and they would sit with these crosswords till 6:37. In those days, you also got a prize of some, maybe a book, or say 10 rupees or 15 rupees for every crossword that you solved. So they'd post multiple crosswords in different names at the post office immediately. And then, they'd win. And that really happened. So, Mario's character, this obsession for crosswords was also something that really came from my neighborhood. Same with the fireman, there was a fireman in my building, Arnold Days, who passed away in the bomb, in the explosion. So again, I linked it all with Cavell. The idea was to give you a semblance of characters from this place. None of them are real, not at least in the book, but obviously inspired, their ideas of life, all of that is inspired from people in my neighborhood.
So yeah, I mean, I love that, all your characters in the book, even though they're not real, they were inspired by, things and people that you saw in daily life.
So, Jane, since you write fiction and non-fiction, and also we read that, your poem was first published when you were 15.
No, I was 11. I was 11 actually.
Oh, okay. I think I read it was 15.
Yeah, I was 11.
Yeah. So, do you still write poetry, and do you have any plans of publishing poetry?
No, I'm a terrible poet. I've tried, but, as a kid, I think that was the easiest form to communicate my ideas, because rhyme worked well with me, and I could easily rhyme, with words and play with words. I didn't think too much of storytelling then, and I used to not read. I hated books.
I also read that you came to reading much later.
Yes, and it is so sad, because
What was the first book that you read and that you liked?
The only book I read as a child was, apart from the children's books, I've read all the children's books, but they were like very easy reads. Your Ladybird books and all of that.
Right, like not
But
classics.
Not the classics. And I think the first book and the only book I read as a child was Nancy Drew, and one detective novel of hers. And
I find it very fascinating because then, you're so voracious reader and you write about books and you've written books.
It's very fascinating. My friend really teases me about this, but when I was in class 10, we had a library exam, and I used to borrow the books, but I would never read them, and I would give it back to the library. And when the library exam came, the teacher would go through the books that you've read and ask you to narrate one of the stories for them. I'd not read any of the books that I picked up, but then I asked one of my friends to just tell me the stories in brief of every book from the list that I had, because I would borrow the same books that she borrowed, a week after. And, in typical fashion, when the library professor, he asked me to come and, tell him a story of some book, I told him the story like I knew it from Adam, and it was just very. And
that's a good skill.
He gave me an A+, and my friend who told me the story got a C, and she was so offended because she's like, that's so unfair. And I think I always had a knack to lie or not lie, I would say, but to imagine stories in my head.
Or maybe you're just a great oral storyteller. That's also a skill.
But also maybe. Now written.
No, but I think I was just very imaginative as a child. I could imagine stories at the top of my head, and I would tell my mom, it's just one of those things that I love doing. And then when I got hooked onto books, it just took off from there. It was a different feeling.
Same here. Yeah.
Even you came to reading quite late, right?
Yeah. So then I used to just borrow books from our library, and then, it was Nancy Drew and Goosebumps, whatever was available. But then later on, I began reading like serious stuff.
I'm still very embarrassed about it, but I did read Mills and Boons when I was 16, and I read like 2 or 3 novels, and that was the first few reads that I had taken. And then
I'm guilty of reading Sidney Sheldon.
As long as we're reading, guys, I think it's okay.
And then I thought, after a point, the plot just seemed to be the same, and it got repetitive. And I said, I need to keep this book down and read something more sensible.
So what's your favorite reading?
I can't really say favorites, but I do have, authors that I do enjoy, like Chimamanda Adichie, one of my favorite authors.
We love her.
I love her. Yeah.
Everyone loves Half of the Yellow Sun, but for some reason I like Purple Hibiscus most. It was her debut novel, and I can read it, over and over again and not get bored.
So why would you say it's your favorite? Is it the Catholic connection?
Yes, and I just found this whole obsession, because I was a church-going Catholic girl. A priest had a very strong influence in my life, and I could so relate with the kind of feelings that she was experiencing as a little girl for the priest and for her religion. And it just seemed to connect with me most.
I haven't read it, but I've read
it recently.
Yes, it's a lovely book. It's a lovely novel.
And you also mentioned Kite Runner in another interview.
Oh yeah, Kite Runner. And I think my college years were shaped by Khaled Hosseini. I don't think a book has made me cry like Kite Runner has. I have.
Yeah, like I can reread that book like anytime.
Yeah, I did. And it did. My college years were shaped by works by Khaled Hosseini, for that matter, or even, I can't remember, but there were so many authors. When I did my master's in literature, just took off from there. My favorite Latin American author is Mario Vargas Llosa. I think I enjoy his humor. It's just so much fun. You should read Aunt Julia and the Scriptwriter. And when you talk about humor, nobody can beat him. He is so funny. He is so funny.
Definitely will check it out.
Yes, you should.
Yeah.
So I still find it really fascinating, Jade, at 21, that, you got to work with the veteran journalist, S. Hussain Zaidi, on this book now that's being adapted into a movie. And I mean, what a great break. So I want to know, how was it working with him? Are there any interesting stories that you remember from that time period? What were you feeling like at that point?
So incidentally, when Hussain approached me, he had read one of my blogs, and again, I used to love writing short stories, and he thought that the story I wrote, was about a sister losing her brother. He thought I wrote it in first person, and he came up to me and he said, I'm really sorry for your loss. And I said, no, but that was fiction. And that is what, and then he started following my work. He was my boss, and he was the editor of The Asian Age, and I was really scared of him, because he was this really beefy person and very, very, he used to shout in office, not shout, but if something went wrong, that he would pick on you. So I was very scared of Hussain in the beginning. And eventually, I think, he kept following the stories that I would write. And one day he came up, he asked me to come to his office and to his room. And he asked me if I was interested in researching a book about, mafia women. And he thought I would be perfect for it because it's very difficult to break into a setup which involves women, and especially for a male journalist, to have someone like him as, and women are very discerning generally. They might be more open to someone younger like me who
That's quite
doesn't.
smart, yeah.
So he thought it would be perfect if I would be perfect for it. But I actually told him no. I can't do
Why?
this.
Oh, really?
Because I was like mafia, and at that point you have certain ideas of it.
And you're 21.
I'm
yeah.
21, and I'm like, no, I don't want to do this. I mean, it's fine. And I went and told my mom, and she's like, yeah, you shouldn't do all of this. It's okay. And I was like, yeah, I'm giving up a book, but so what? At this point, I didn't even know I wanted to write a book. I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to become a political journalist, change the world with my pen, and,
Wow,
and all
really?
of this. And I'm like, why do I write about crime? It doesn't even interest me. But Hussain kept. He kept asking, are you considering, it's not going to be a bad idea. He eventually even met my mom and told me, you're going to be fine. Your daughter's going to be fine. You should just get her to do this. And it was fun from there, it required, because I was doing my full-time job at the Asian Age, but my work hours were 4 to 1. And I would research in the morning. So I'd meet all my subjects in the morning. And then after that, I would come to work early, maybe say by 3 o'clock instead of 4:30. And then, sit with Hussain. We'd sift all the material that we had because he had already done some kind of research. And we'd put all our work together. And then I started writing with him. And the relationship changed over a period of time because we were obviously at one point I was very, very, and I used to call him Hussain sir for the longest time. But then we became co-authors. So we, you start looking at each other as people who are going to be contributing to put a book together. So that helped me look at him as an equal, not, at work, but outside of it.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how, he spotted a story on your blog. So we were just reading your blog and we loved the post about, turning 30 because we are soon going to turn 30.
Yeah.
So, and we were wondering if you had any plans, like how you mentioned in the post, do you have any plans of, what you're going to do next? Like what you're going to write next or explore next?
No, so, I do want, if I'm going to tell a story, it has to be something that fits into the kind of stories that I bring to the table with, with my research and paper. It should make a difference. It should not be storytelling for the heck of it. And I personally believe it's the only way you can connect with a reader. If you're going to be talking about love stories, well, there are lots of love stories there. But there has to be context. There has to be a place where you tell your story in so that it makes it more pleasurable as a story. And it also informs you because as a journalist, you always are looking at informing people. I believe that, with this book also, I've attempted at informing people about something like Cavell. The fact that it's been 2 months since the book released and Cavell as a place has generated so much interest in people, like people from Kerala and Delhi write to me saying, I want to come to this neighborhood to just visit it if it is for real.
That's amazing.
And that I think says a lot because that is what I intended to do with this story.
So now, Jane, what we want to do with you is a small rapid fire question answer. So we're going to ask you a bunch of questions and if you could just give us your answer.
So is it Muscat or Mumbai?
Mumbai.
Fiction or non-fiction?
Fiction.
Goans or Mangies?
Mangaloreans.
Favorite place to write?
My balcony.
Thank you so much, Jane, for being a guest on our podcast. I think it was so insightful. I learned so much about the Mangalorean, Goan, Cavell, and, your work as a journalist.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
it was
you.
great fun.
Thank you again. Thank you for having me here.
I really enjoyed this conversation, Tara, because Jane and I have so much in common. And I also enjoyed, her process of research, behind Bombay Balchao.
Yeah, she was so rigorous. I mean, she was just so hardworking. She is so hardworking. I also am glad that we spoke to her about her articles because I mentioned it in the interview as well that I religiously read her articles and it was great getting to meet her in person. I love how we talk to such talented and versatile people. It really is a dream come true. And I'm so excited about our next guest, who is Abhijit Kirni. He is a storyteller, he's a graphic novelist, he's an illustrator, and I can't wait to find out how he tells his stories through text and art.
Yeah, I've always wanted to talk to a graphic novelist, so I can't wait. I'm sure you guys can't wait too, so stay tuned for our next episode. And please feel free to reach out to us with any feedback that you've got. We are on Insta, Facebook, and Twitter @Bound India.